right. Abby Lane, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
All right, so let's get started. I'm curious, how long ago were you diagnosed with ADHD, and how old were you, and kind of what was going on in your life at the time that really led you to start putting two and two together and thinking this could be ADHD?
Sure. Well, more of a recent diagnosis. It's been about 2 years now, officially. And although now that I understand that I have it, it's just making so many things make sense. Yeah, so diagnosis came last 2 summers ago. Well, not the diagnosis, but kind of the event that led me to understand that I have ADHD happened 2 summers ago. I had decided, I grew up going to a summer camp my entire childhood, and I would be what you would call like a camp kid, which is probably also ADHD. But I was really into it, like the kid that would say, one time at camp, blah, 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 one time at camp. So that was definitely my childhood. I only stopped working there because I got like a real paying job, which is what I do now as a furniture designer. But that was literally, I probably could have gone 2 directions in my career, sticking with that or not. So, I have a child now, he's 9, and he was getting old enough to be able to go to camp, and I'm very excited about sending him and been able to, finally share with him some of the same things I had done. And it was a very expensive camp. Things have changed a lot since I went going there, and if you've ever looked at camps in North Carolina, they are not inexpensive to do. So I thought it might be nice to try to relive some of my camp experience, as well as get to have some fun with him doing a scholarship swap where I would work at the camp while I would have him get to go on scholarship. And little did I realize, this is all during COVID, which also made things, apparently COVID was another area that added a lot of stress to my life, because I have a medical condition that made things a little bit more scary. And so just in general, leading up, I have a full-time job, I run my own company, all these different things were happening. But when it came to the camp, apparently that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because when I had gone there as a camper, technology was still pretty basic. We weren't doing too much. Email was like about as far, and I think maybe my last year of working there, I had a cell phone, but it was in my 20s. So it had been 20 years since I had been there to work it. And while some things remained just the same in all the traditions, the back end was significantly more in-depth, let's just say. And working at the camp and trying to still run my own company, I'm a solopreneur, so even though I dedicated time off, definitely kept care to limit what I had going on, but I still have to maintain it. So apparently the idea of running the camp, I was camp hostess, which meant constant phone calls, constant interruptions, constant people coming in and out. Then I had a malfunction on the computer that was making my computer, the mouse stop working and just start randomly clicking everything, all while I'm trying to get a project done. And anyways, and then lack of sleep. It's a 1920s building with no AC, and apparently I'm not used to not having good sleeping conditions, and it was really hot at night, and throw in 4 days of really limited sleep and trying to get out of a working condition that wasn't the best scenario, realizing it was triggering and making some things happen. Like I could tell something didn't feel right. I had too much stress, too many things going on, and lots of interruptions, and more than I'll get into here. But all that led to my very first panic attack, which was a very scary event because of a previous condition that I have. I have in my past lived through a medical aortic dissection, and this panic attack, some physical things that were happening to me prior to, reminded me of some things that happened just before my actual aortic dissection that I had when I was 25. And so then the panic attack turned into PTSD, fun things. But all that being said, how did I get diagnosed? Well, after all this, finally getting things figured out, I removed myself from the camp situation. It was a very kind of crazy time, but I was discussing everything with a good friend of mine, and she has ADHD, and she just assumed I knew. I don't know if that happens to you a lot, but people just, oh yeah, I just knew you knew, and you just weren't doing, stuff about it. I was like, I had never heard of it. I mean, I only knew of like little boys having ADHD, but yeah, definitely wasn't even a thing on my radar. But now that she mentioned it, and so then I immediately, because it was such a scary event, such a big pivotal thing that had happened in my life. Nothing like that had ever happened where my brain had kind of just given up and like tired out and said, I can't do anymore. It was kind of a really scary experience, that whole thing, and never want that to happen again. So I immediately went and got various help and started going down the road of getting diagnosed, found a significantly better doctor that she is like fantastically well-rounded, and like had to do all that. I mean, it took the course of getting my first initial idea of it. It took well over a year to get everything kind of more streamlined and in tune. But things have been great now that I've kind of got my head around it, understanding what it is that was maybe amping things up. I think my entire life I probably had been dealing with everything just fine, and having my child, that added a lot more elements to my day-to-day life, which was awesome. And I loved my job, and I loved doing all these stuff, but I was always like a more kind of person. And, I think when COVID came along, it was just kind of like, yeah, too much. So anyways, That's kind of jumping right into that. But yeah, that's kind of how I found out.
So your friend who had ADHD, what was it about the experience with camp and the panic attack, and because there's so much there, right? There's the sleep deprivation, there's the heat, there's the sensory stuff, but also the triggering of I guess it was the fact that the symptoms felt so similar to when you had this experience when you were 25. Okay. Also, the aortic, I know, right? So the aortic dissection, what is that? Can you just explain to me what that is? Is that a heart attack? What happened in that moment?
Not a heart attack. So essentially, and I'm not a doctor, but basically there's the tubes that come off of your heart where the flap that would make the blood go in and out and like not go backwards. And then the tube part of it that comes off of that is your aorta. There's like 3 different, I think, chambers, or I should know. But it only happened to me. But it turns out I have a genetic condition called Marfan syndrome, which I did not know I had. And one of the conditions is that various, any tissue that is like eye tissue, other things have a mutation in it and make it so that they're not perfectly connected. And so what happens in an aortic dissection is that your aorta starts to essentially unravel, and then blood is like filling into your chest. I should have died. In fact, it's kind of, I still stand out to the cardiac surgeon out of Duke that saved my life. I think I stand out to him a lot because it's a pretty rare day for him to actually get a real living person who didn't just die in 5 seconds, because that's what typically happens. If you have an aortic dissection, you're dead. So miracle.
Wow.
I don't know.
and this happened to you while you were working at the camp.
Yeah, so I was just sitting at my desk. Back when I was 25, that just happened when I was sitting at my desk, and we were chatting with another coworker about where to go for birthday lunch. And what was reminding me, for weeks prior to that, I had been feeling like heavy chested. And for months prior to that, I thought I had been developing adult asthma. I've been playing a lot of ultimate frisbee and was in the best shape of my life. And that's actually what the doctor thought maybe is what saved my life, because some of the other because everything had been kind of working hard for a while, he was just thinking that maybe that's what siphoned off the bleeding, and in my particular case, and made it so I was able to I even drove myself to the hospital. It was just such a mess. But that's another topic, you know. But yeah, so that, I forgot your question. See, there's ADHD.
So, okay. So I just wanted to get a better sense of how traumatic this experience was when you were 25, because it was like this, obviously triggered something in you having this burnout state. And so I was just trying to make the connection about what it was about the burnout that then triggered for you similar reaction to then having this panic attack.
The similarities were, I was having chest tightness, and I think a lot of that now, I think it was maybe anxiety that was happening, and I'm learning a lot about how that might work, but understanding that I was in this I was very exhausted. I mean, it was like 5-6 days of really no sleep and not really figuring out how to both make it so my child wouldn't get kicked out of summer camp, as well as still understanding that I needed to do something for myself to get out of this bad situation that just wasn't working out. You know, you go in with the best intentions, and I was really excited, and it was a fail. But anyways, so I think the chest tightness was some anxiety stuff. And then I think the lack of sleep, I was sitting at the desk trying to do the morning routine, and I was literally passing out. Like, I could feel myself sitting still and just wanting to pass out, which is not something that has ever happened. So it was very uncommon. And then I realized that the people at the camp didn't know. I hadn't really gone into detail about what would ever happen if I was, it's on my little health form that I filled out, but like, I know no one had read it. And so part of the panic attack, I think too, was like making sure that they knew that if something happened to me, this was serious and this needed to get communicated very quickly. And then like the adrenaline of trying to communicate all of that information, like it was just I don't know. But if anybody's ever experienced a panic attack, it was a surprising thing to be in, because it wasn't just like a minimal panic attack. This was like a full-on, full-blown, like I thought I was dying kind of thing. So it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Scary.
So then I'm fascinated to figure out the connection then between this experience and how a friend of yours with ADHD was able to
that was
suggest it.
Yeah, so that was kind of a huge experience, obviously. And then that wasn't necessarily completely isolated. Then trying to get myself out, like home safely, and that, like, it was probably a good 2 weeks of trying to a week of trying to like figure out how to safely get home and get out of the situation and all that. But then the rest of the summer, like once I was home and removed from that situation, like while I was still needing to like recover from what had happened, like mentally and emotionally and all, and digest it all, I was safe and I knew that wasn't a problem. But then I started noticing that, like, I think I was really paying a lot of attention to what was bringing my energy up and down, and understanding that there was something going on where if certain things were happening, like it would almost give me like a buzzing feeling, like, or like just high energy. And then I started really taking notes because I wanted to understand what the heck had happened to me, right? Because it was so scary. And so I started taking a lot of notes and keeping track of what things were bringing that energy up and what things were low. And so I ended up having a nice chat with her. She was helping. She knew had just been totally overwhelmed. Like, we had discussed that a little bit. And she was over at my house helping me organize my office, because I just felt like I needed to have things like calm. It was too much stimuli, too much excitement, too much everything was happening around my life. And so she was helping me. That's one of the things that she's just naturally good at. She's one of those organizer friends. And so we were organizing things, and she was talking to me about stuff. And she just meant, when I was kind of describing all the things that I was noticing that were making the energy up and down, and I feel like making that list was really helpful. And Because I didn't even know I didn't even know that this was something to look for. Because it wasn't even on my. Now it's funny because now when she mentioned it, I started listening to some podcasts and I was like, oh,
right, yeah.
So that was really interesting. But yeah, so that was definitely a kind of harsh way to find out that you have this thing. Turns out, I mean, it makes so much sense, and looking back on it all now with 2020 vision. COVID. I would say that, the writing was on the wall for a long time, but I've always been a super high achiever and really pretty smart and can usually do and handle most things, even if I might get a little frantic with some of the amount of things I might say yes to and get myself into trouble for doing too much. But it always works out, and I've always been able to work through it. I've never been in a situation where anything I had done had affected my health in such a way, which was, sleep is apparently incredibly important. So. Yeah.
It is. It's so true, right? And I think that's one of the things with ADHD and how so many of us dismissed it as didn't even know what it was, or it didn't even enter as a possibility because, we're not relating to the hyperactivity element. That's just sort of woven into the overachieving and the burnout and the anxiety and the depression. like all of that stuff is what we relate to, which is that feeling of treading water and treading water and treading water and not realizing until something happens, some catalyst comes along to destroy this house of cards that we had built up. And then you start to look and realize oh, okay, I didn't realize how tightly wound I was, and all, you have to start really looking over everything now with this fine tooth comb. And like you said, I just had to do less and minimize and start. It's almost I feel like COVID was an elimination diet for a lot of us, in the way that we had to just everything just stopped, and then we've had to bring things back one at a time. But it's not very often in your life where do you get an experience where you are kind of stopped dead in your tracks like that. And
it was interesting there because in my world things didn't stop. In fact, I was prior to COVID happening, for work-wise, I'm super successful, so that's awesome. And part of being a freelancer is you get more customers. And I had been developing and getting more and more customers for years. And I was already basically at burnout before, I had been listening to all these things about how to get out of burnout before COVID. And then the furniture world, it was a really interesting thing what happened with COVID because, so I draw furniture for all these big brands. And essentially everybody at first was oh, let's stop everything. This is, things are really, we don't know what's going to happen. But if you noticed, everybody decided to they didn't get to do their vacations. So instead of that, they worked on their home projects. Mm-hmm. So not only did everything kind of stop for a second, but then everybody wanted to pivot and reshift. And now I'm making nothing but home office because that's, of course, going to be the next big thing. And anything I had been working on and was completed with got stopped, but then they had to restart on something new. So there was no break. Immediately rolling in from one thing to the next. It was a different, and I'm, my son's at home and he's getting, it's it was an interesting time. So that's partially I was definitely trying to figure out ways to lessen the load prior to COVID, but then it's fooled you. Let's throw in a pandemic. Let's see how we can really push someone over.
That's so fascinating. You don't really think about how furniture design is affected by everybody being at home, but absolutely, right? What a huge pivot in terms of, we were all online shopping. We were all creating all of these home offices. That's so interesting.
The one benefit I had was that I had a lot of stuff. I've been a furniture designer now for 20 years. And so I have a lot of work in the pipe that I've been selling for a while. So the way I get paid is for each dresser that sells, I'll make, some percentage of it. And so I was real thankful that everyone did want to buy furniture because I sold a lot of furniture during that time. It was great. That was good.
Now, your son, how old was your son at the beginning of COVID? He's 9 now.
He was going, what was that?
Was he in first grade?
Kindergarten. His kindergarten year got interrupted.
Wow, that's young. I was always so great. My son was in the third grade, and I was so grateful he wasn't any younger because it was so, like, just to suddenly become the teacher, the chef, the housekeeper, all of those things while still trying to do a business was so hard for so many of us. But he's been diagnosed with ADHD too, right?
He did, and actually, I kind of wasn't sure. I knew something. I wasn't sure if he had more just anxiety or what, but now that once I learned what my thing was, I was like, oh, that's what it is. And then I got diagnosed first, and then we had him tested, and he is as well. But I think we both kind of have more. It sounded like we got tested at separate places. But it was interesting because the profile was kind of similar between the two of us. So we both have giftedness, and so there's that side of things. And so we're off the charts in some areas. And then on other sides, we're like surprisingly low. And so it's not I was told by both the person who diagnosed my son as well as myself that, yes, we have it, but it's not necessarily like the same variation. Everybody's like spectrum or whatever presentation.
Yeah.
That's a better word to say. It's not necessarily the same presentation that everyone has. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. I've talked about this on the podcast, too. Like my son and my daughter, I never in a million years would have thought my daughter had ADHD. I was diagnosed, and my son and I are like cut from the same cloth. Immediately, I was like, he and I have the same issues with concentration and recall and a lot of the working memory stuff. Like his executive dysfunction and mine are very, very similar. And so immediately I was like, yes, he has it. Never until I started this podcast would I have thought my daughter had it, because she's just very, very, very high functioning, very, I hate that term, but I can never think of what else to use, but like just really, really well in school, is doing really well in school, high honors, just very together, but at the same time, right? But then like once she started entering high school, I think with the combination of COVID and high school, her anxiety was so high that she started having panic attacks, and she was having panic attacks. Like the first time she had a panic attack at school and I had to pick her up, it was because she found out she got a 75 in French class. And I was like, that is not normal. Like 70, that's not something to get upset about. So but it was interviewing so many women who were diagnosed in adulthood and seeing this pattern of, high achieving, high honors, doing really, really well in school, but like white knuckling it and then developing this compensation, right? This perfectionism and this anxiety, and seeing that in my daughter and being like, oh, so this is the other side, this other presentation of ADHD that we're not seeing in women who are able to kind of keep it together. And so, then they were both diagnosed with anxiety. So it was ADHD and generalized anxiety. And I'm like, good, you're welcome.
And I think in my case too, a lot of where it's like the anxiety side of it maybe kicked in more once I was a mom, because then I love what I do. I'm good at what I do. I thrive. I'm crushing it as a furniture designer. I found my thing. I hyper focus. I lean in. Like I'm really good at it. But I'm also, a wife. I'm a mom. I want to be a super mom as well. And that mom guilt is a real thing, and even though I was able to work from home and be there a lot, when I was crunched for time, it would keep me up at night thinking how I had pushed him away while I was trying to finish up a project and what have you. And, that's kind of where some more of those types of unhappiness or, the anxiety or guilt, like that I might be messing it up or, it's been funny because I would say in life I'm pretty laid back, but like when it comes to I think I'm a mama bear. I'm like, I want to be the best mom that could be in existence. So
yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that's a theme that kind of is woven throughout a lot of these conversations with perfectionism and people pleasing and some of those other qualities that a lot of us develop, and that desire to be like the best at everything. And like, where is that coming from? And I think a lot of it is a sense of hypervigilance, right? I think a lot of it comes from the trauma of growing up undiagnosed and really feeling like it's a control issue, right? Because you think about all the ways in which we try to get control in our life when we feel generally out of control with having not have this diagnosis. And so I think it's very interesting to me how many of us have that control mode that we get into of like wanting to be the best at everything, because it's like, this is how we prove our worth. And this is how we can kind of feel like we are, I'm trying to think of another word for control. But anyway, I think it's very interesting to me because a lot of it is very similar to the hypervigilance, which is the number one, trait or symptom of PTSD. And so it's like, looking at trauma and like, what traumas do we experience as women? What traumas do we experience as undiagnosed neurodivergent women, and then as mothers, right? Like it's unpacking all of that all at once with this diagnosis, which no wonder is so fascinating and overwhelming. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I think getting the diagnosis has been one of the best things because it helps me understand. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a scenario where you're just not clicking with someone, or it's like, and like I got bullied a lot in middle school, high school, and I'm sure it had something to do with my neurodivergence. I'm sure I was doing stuff that was different and off-putting to others and not being aware of it. And I feel like some of those experiences where you're just not vibing with that person, and so then they may have the pushback. So I think that might have been where some of the bullying stemmed from when I was a kid. But now as an adult, like I might be in a business setting or even just talking to a neighbor, and you're just like, I feel awkward because I can tell things aren't right. Like I don't feel comfortable around you in this moment, and I don't know why I don't feel comfortable, but I don't feel like I can be myself or whatever. Now I kind of know. It's like, oh, somehow somehow the ADHD mannerisms or whatever are like, we're not vibing. But I now want to diagnose like all of my friends because I'm pretty sure most of them have some level of neurodivergence, whether it's something or something else. And like, oh yes, yep, parents, yep. It's all
well, right. And I know, and that's why so many of us, I think, are right. I think it's why so many of us are always confused by the, am I an extrovert or an introvert? Because there are people that I'm drawn to and really relate to and feel very outgoing and very connected to. But then there's also people that I feel incredibly uncomfortable around, and realizing that has a lot more to do with how we communicate as neurodivergent versus neurotypical, as opposed, and that there was always this like weird unspoken vibe that I could never articulate or address. And now being like, being able to realize that this has more to do with what are our topics of interest and how do we even how do we even talk? How do we even relate to each other? And I think that's been really eye-opening to realize that there are significant differences in terms of how people who are neurodivergent communicate and why we are so comfortable and drawn to each other, and why a lot of the friends that we've had over the years, if we're still friends 20, 30 years later, we probably are all neurodivergent for that reason.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And then the flip side of that is that now I've learned to just kind of let it go. Like I don't need to ruminate on why a thing might have gone wrong because that I definitely have had that affliction since a child, where like I used to like try to dissect every single thing that had happened and try to like learn from it, and wouldn't necessarily like focus on it in a bad way, but more so wanting to problem solve, because I would say I'm super into problem solving. And so I would just like crunch on those things. Well, now it's just like I just have a different mindset now. Now I'm just like, oh, well, that was probably just from this. Moving on.
Right?
And it's like, no big deal. It is what it is. I love myself. Good job, Abby. And then I just move along. And it's interesting just that I feel like having the knowledge has been so powerful for me, because it's like, I just don't focus on these things that I don't need. It is what it is, you just move forward. So that's been sweet.
Yeah, I feel like I often use the like river analogy for myself, where I'm like, I no longer feel like I'm trying to force things or treading water or swimming upstream. It's like you said, like when you're not in a state of constantly treading water, you're able to see these moments where you're sort of like, oh, okay, I'm not going to force this. I'm not going to try to jam this into where like, this is just not going to happen. And then you can, and I think that minimizes a lot of our sense of anxiety and a lot of that sense of what's wrong with me and all of the shame that comes around all of that. Now, I wanted to, so you had mentioned in some, the bullying, but is there anything when you looked back after your diagnosis, when you looked back at your childhood, were you like, oh, the signs were clearly there all along?
Yeah. I mean, like some of the things I was pretty adventurous as a kid. And, I would, what is it? I forget exactly what they call it, but when, you have lower, not ambition, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Lower brain broke there. Sometimes I forget things. No, but like where I might have, be a little bit more reckless essentially. And like, I was into the camp thing as we talked about. And, I would I was at home alone a lot in the evenings because my mom was a flight attendant and my dad worked late. And so I just filled time up with stuff. And I grabbed some rope out of the garage and would learn how to rappel out of the window of my house. Like it was just, I was perfectly safe. I had learned how to do it at camp. Like, yeah, I mean, like I tell that story to people and they're like, what? I definitely was, I'm very motivated by money. I was always an entrepreneur, like even, again, at the camp, I'm back in the camp world, I would like bring string to wrap people's hair and get $5 to do it. And then I was real smart one year and I went to the craft store and got like little big bobs that would like go on to it. And I would charge like 50 cents for each little charm. Like I was making money. So that part's kind of funny. But we moved around a lot. I grew up moving around from place to place. So I think maybe one of the reasons why it wasn't ever picked up on my favorite years, I lived in Puerto Rico for fourth and fifth grade, excuse me. And I mean, I think it was kind of like a paradise of fun things to do that were just go crazy and have fun and explore, and probably kept me from standing out in like a bad way, because there was just so many fun things. And I think a lot of the kids that went down there that had parents who they were probably, I would have been reflecting on that, they're probably having some neurodivergence too, because those friends I was super popular. It was like I had found my people. This was great. And then when we moved back to the States, it was a big shift going from being really popular to not outright like picked out as not. Of course, those were also the formidable years of middle school. So, I was a tall, skinny redhead with braces and loud mouth, and I'm a loud talker, and I'm sure it was just a whole mess of all the things that could be picked on.
Yeah, right. That's so interesting. I remember somebody once telling me that, like, if you ask somebody what their favorite memory is from childhood, it almost always involves one of both being outside and having no adults around. And I always found that so interesting because it's so true. Like, all of our favorite memories usually involve both of those two qualities. And I'm like, that's not something our kids ever get anymore. Very, very rarely. Also, I think the word you were looking for before was inhibition, was it?
That's what I was
thinking.
Yes, okay. I couldn't. Thank you.
I know I have those moments all the time where I'm like, you talk around a word and it's like, I know what it is. Yeah. That's so interesting because I do think inhibition and impulsivity and
Impulsive was another thing I was
creativity,
trying to think of.
right? Like they're all connected in terms of that act now, think later mentality that I think can work really well in our favor, especially as entrepreneurs, as creatives. Like I think there is that lack of second guessing, that really like moving forward and going with your gut, and that I think benefits us a lot. But then you see sort of the other side of that same impulse, which is the spending and trying to think of some of the other ways in which it could impact us negatively.
Yeah, and on the positive side, it's probably been one of that impulsivity and that, inhibition, like not worrying about what might happen. That is probably one of the reasons I'm super successful as a freelancer, because I didn't mind just cold calling and hopping in to go talk to a CEO of some company and like having my book and being like, hello. Did it all the time. And if they said no, just moved on. And it was just not something that was worrying to me. But then when I try to, I do a lot of mentoring, and it's just been really, it's funny because I'd always tell people in the mentoring side, like, you got to take these steps, you've got to do it. And now that I am diagnosed, I'm like, oh, that's probably a lot more difficult for a neurotypical person. Like that's going to be a lot harder. They're not just going to as easily go for it and maybe I almost would get energy from it. I would be like, whether it went good or bad, I would feel like hyper afterwards, like, yeah, I did it. You would get like this, kind of like when you win a game or something, a sport game or something like that. But yeah, it's kind of, but that would be kind of where, as an adult, it's been a benefit to be able to hone it into that kind of thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, I think looking back over your experience, especially in your industry, what are some of the qualities that you attribute to ADHD?
Being good, the hyper focus for sure. It's interesting because so many people talk about not being able to get their work in on time and all that. I was the opposite. When I studied industrial design in college, I never had an overnight, like a sleepless night where I didn't get the job done. In fact, the only time we ever got an extension on a project was the time that I told the teacher, like, I wasn't able to get it done. And he's like, class, stop. Everyone gets an extension. And it was because I hadn't gotten it done. He knew that if I hadn't gotten it done, then like it was an impossible deadline. So so that's been kind of interesting. But I mean, I think it was that hyper focus. And I figured out, I don't know what this is about my brain, but I've learned that some other folks in the creative world do this too, but I have to have either like an old television show playing or music or something. And when I have that playing in the background, especially if it's something I haven't seen before or that I have seen before, I can just like put that on the side and it will like put me in total focus. It's really weird. I can't write an email or I have to turn it off to do that. But when I'm drawing, if I have that going, I can just stay there for hours. And for whatever reason, that combo seems to keep me visually, because I'm on the visual side of things, visually focused.
Yeah, I know, right? It's so interesting. I had a previous guest articulate it once really well, where she was saying that like there's this part, it occupies the part of your brain that is distractible, right? So if you can like keep that part of your brain, and I feel like it's a very neurodivergent thing to talk about our brain in as though it's like has these different parts to it and they're all battling with each other. And I always, we talk about our brains in third person, which I always think is interesting too, where it's like with this petulant roommate. Right. But, this idea that there's like this section of your brain that is highly distractible. And if you can actively occupy that part of your brain, we can enter into this intense focus with a lot of the other, something that's a little not quite using the same section of your brain, right? Like I think about that with doodling is such a perfect example of how we are able to anchor ourselves to a task.
Yeah, and I used to do like friendship bracelets as a young person, and I'm realizing now that's so interesting. I really never thought about it like that. The way that you said the occupying your brain, I'll remember that now and think about that. Oh yeah, I mean, whenever I'm getting into a show or something, like, oh yeah, I'm just occupying that section of my brain so I can stay focused. But that's been kind of a superpower there, figuring that out. I think I just happened to figure that out in college, and I just had been using that. And thankfully, my very first job, my boss, who's to say if he's neurodivergent, could be, he was of the mindset, like it was a small company, 15 people, and it's kind of the perfect place to get started in a career. And he's just like, if you get your work done, like I was probably one of the highest performing designers in his office, and he'd catch me sometimes watching TV. I was trying to be sneaky about it. I had 2 screens and I'd have that going on. And he's like, look, I don't care. You don't have to hide that from me. He's like, if you're getting your work done as great as you're doing, like, no problem. Like, do what you need to do. So that was really, not every boss would be so understanding. I feel like I lucked out having such a great experience straight out of school.
I know, right? And I feel like that's such a great example of having a supervisor who is like, what is even the word, like output oriented versus, process or method oriented. Because I've had supervisors who didn't care what I did. They just wanted to know, they wanted me to be very by the book in terms of how I did things. I use the example of my publisher a lot, who was very frustrated with the fact that I would do things last minute. And so she would, and it was a monthly magazine. I was editing a monthly magazine. So I did a lot of things last minute. And so she would get really, really frustrated. And she wanted me to like log all the time I was working and what I was doing during that time. And it was so frustrating. I ended up quitting because I was like, who does, like, I don't have time to do that. It was so, but anyway, So the other thing, I wanted to backtrack a little bit about this fascinating experience that you had at camp, because you had mentioned something about like the PTSD part being that you were like constantly retelling this story. And I'm fascinated about that because I feel like, we talk a lot about verbal processing and how we really sort of have a lot of, we're long-winded. It's one of our charms, but I think we're storytellers too, right? Like, I think, so what was that connection for you where you were kind of reliving this experience that you had in your 20s through sharing it, or how was that experience for you?
In that particular experience, I think what more so leading up more in the symptoms of not being able to sleep, like it helped contribute to this not being able to sleep at night, and then even post recovery, because I didn't even get into it, but like I had one PTSD event that happened, and then I had a second PTSD event like that next day, and then I had a third PTSD event the third day, because everything was still scary. I hadn't actually gone to the hospital to get checked out. I'd gone to like an urgent care. But what would happen, I did that thing where I'm changing subjects. So I would, be telling my husband at night, I'd call him from the camp and be telling him like all these things are both either going right or wrong, because I wanted to keep in touch with him. And then thinking about it in the past, when I was a kid, when I was at camp, I was just at camp. I didn't worry about the outside world. Like I was just, so here I'm like trying to retell him what's going on. And then I had an app idea. My husband's a software developer, and when everything's going so wrong, it's a great time to have great creative ideas because you're thrown into this new scenario. And I was like noticing, like I could create this app for communication. That's a whole nother side thing, but that was also giving me a lot of energy. And when I was trying to explain it to him, instead of winding down for night, I would be like winding myself up, and then I'd be trying to keep track of all that. And so then that was happening. And then after the first PTSD event, and I was trying to get myself home, was telling my husband about stuff, which was kind of making me relive and having that tightness of chest. And like, again, because of my heart background and my issues with the heart stuff, like it was like, didn't feel right. And when things don't feel right in my particular case, like that actually needs to get checked out. Like, it's not, it's like, it's kind of hard too, I noticed in the healthcare industry, it was weird because here I have a legitimate thing. I know this is probably psychosomatic. Like I even knew that. I knew it probably was, but trying to get the right healthcare, get actually scanned so I could no, like things are good. Cause I get a scan every year. Like this is normal for me. So anyways, so then, I had to leave this camp early I had to get myself, it was bad enough that I was like, I cannot do this, and trying to get myself home. So then I went to my aunt's house. She's a couple hours away, and was telling her about the whole story and what was making me so aggravated. And the whole situation of how I left was a whole nother story. They handled it really poorly. And the boss guy, it was bad. it was a surprisingly, shockingly, really poorly handled situation. And that infuriated me as well, because here I know I am a grown woman who's smart and capable, and him having a situation. And then he's like he's counseling young women who are the counselors and putting them in very stressful situations. And I had been already noticing some of that stuff. And so I'm retelling all these things and how it was like unjust and all this. And then I felt like I needed to probably tell my mom, because I knew my aunt would call my mom. And so then I was like, she wanted to know all the things. And so I was telling the story again. And then it was handled so poorly that I wanted to talk to my brother, who's a lawyer, in case like I should be doing something about this. And so I was telling him the whole story. And that was like, basically, in hindsight, leaving me completely triggered for multiple days. And then the third panic attack one was actually once I had already gotten home, and I had been talking to my brother the whole car ride, verbal processing, like you mentioned. And right when I got home, he was starting to give his retort of his lawyer speak. And he's like, yeah, like this happened and that happened. And he's like, and you still haven't even been checked out, blah, 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 blah. Like they didn't handle by calling, they should have called an ambulance, and they should have done this and they should have done that. And then all of a sudden I had this realization. I was like, I never got scanned. And that was what led to this like third panic attack. Cause it was like, he's right. I still could be I still could be having a problem. Like I still don't feel right. So it was just kind of like, it's interesting when you're people were all wanting to help, and then getting back into the story again. It's almost like if something like that happens, if you have a panic attack, like you need to tell someone once, but like trying to limit or being really strong about saying, I can't talk about this right now. Because it was really hard for me. Like everyone was caring, and I felt like I almost like, talking about people pleasing, like almost felt like I needed to explain it to them so that they would understand. But like, that was not the time to do that. So that's something else I learned along the way, because it wasn't until weeks later that it's like, oh, and I was talking to a therapist about it, and that was still like, I was still in that triggered state. I don't know the best plan of action if I were to ever do it again, but I do know that definitely probably kept me not in my best state for longer than necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think,
and that was good. Took me, unfortunately, they never took me in at the emergency room, and I had to go do it 2 days later elsewhere. But it was just like, it was like, and then that was a whole nother mess. Like, apparently if they think you have some sort of anxiety, they won't get you in. You have to use different words and stand up and that's a tough one too, being female. If they think you have if they think you're having
hysterical,
if they think you're hysterical or whatever, they will write you off. And it's like, I cannot be written off. And I was talking to the cardiologist about it, and they're like, you don't ever don't say those words. And they were like, you've got to use like heart, he's like, just say heart attack, even though it's not. You just use those words and you will get in.
Mm.
Oh, didn't know that. Oh, he's like, there's that, certain things. And it was just, and even all that, taking all that in, I'm analyzing this and being like surprised at the way that the healthcare, it's like, I kept noticing when I was in this interesting state, like here were all these things wrong at the camp, and here were all these things wrong here. And it was interesting because it was just, I was pulled out of my normal routine, and I kept noticing these like big problems at various places. And I couldn't get my brain to stop wanting to solve those problems. So that's been funny.
Well, it's such a perfect case study on overstimulation and how difficult it is to regulate our nervous systems when we are like tipped over the edge, right? Like I always use the example with my kids of when you're, a jostled cup, and if you're half full of water and you get jostled a little bit, it's fine. You recover quite easily. But when you're at the full, when the water's at the rim, anytime a cup is jostled, everything comes tumbling out over and over and over again. And it's just like exponentially, it makes everything exponentially worse when you're in that state of overstimulation. And so you start to, like you said, you start to notice all the things that are going wrong and all of these things. And then just also like, just not being able to like course correct or recover from anything at that point.
Or even figure out how to, like, you noticing it and you're like, I don't even know how to get what I need. How do I make this change? Like, I need something to change, and you're not necessarily in the best state of mind to be able to like think of the most clear answer. Like when if you're super stimulated, some of the ideas that you have may not be the most concise or most like best, because they're kind of just like, you're just kind of grabbing it.
Which is, I guess, well, and I think it's probably why our body starts to go into these states of alarm and panic, and like where our body really starts to speak up and be like, you have to listen to me, you need to stop. And we get sort of into this place where we're forced to shut down and clear our schedules and deal with the burnout, because our body is screaming at us to be like, pay attention. We tried doing this gently and you're not paying attention. So now I'm going to put you into some sort of physical shutdown mode.
Katie, you just mentioned something that was also so surprising and interesting to me when I was in that panic attack state. I have never been so clear and direct with what my needs were in that moment at that time, ever. I felt like I was having a cardiac event. I immediately called the nurse. I said, come here. Like, I texted her. I said, you must come here now. I yelled over to the lady in the other room and saying, like, I have Marfan syndrome. Like, I'm passing out. Like, this is bad. Bam, bam, bam. And I was like using very clear directions, 1-word answers. And like, I did not need to explain anything. Like, you don't need to know why all this stuff's happening, but I am like, this is what I need at this moment right now. Do your thing, and, so that was interesting because I was definitely in like that fight or flight or whatever. Like when you think you might be in like a death zone and you're trying to like get yourself, like, you're not, that was actually a different experience. Like, it was later on that I might've been thinking about all sorts of bigger ideas, but like I was focused and direct, like, this is exactly what I need in this moment. And we need to like make sure I get some medical care because something's wrong, which was apparently just exhaustion, but didn't know at the time. Felt like something worse.
Right? I know. I've had similar experiences where my body has gone into that, like, you need to shut down mode. And for me, it's twice now where I've started to get vertigo, and,
yeah,
right. And where I had to, and that's been kind of the trigger for me to have to, where I'm like, I literally can't function. So I have to stop everything. And then it becomes that like regulatory, elimination diet, right? Which is like we have to just stop everything and then slowly bring things back. But always managing that sense of overstimulation and managing how quickly we can get dysregulated when it comes to that.
Knowing what it is now, and I don't think it'll ever happen to me again, or at least nothing to that state, because I wouldn't allow it. I would never allow myself to lean into all the, like, I didn't realize how all these things were building. But just like you, when you're saying, oh, now I have a thing, and as soon as I notice this, I do that. So like the same thing. As soon as I'm noticing something different in my body, or a tiredness or what have you, I now have like healthy solutions. And I know that, you just need to be self-advocate. If you're feeling these things, who cares about the people pleasing? Like, you need to, or at least that's how I feel. I feel like I'm going to be taking those steps and doing, I now know that there's a reason why I might be feeling these ways, or there's a reason why that I might need to have something different happen for me. And that's okay. I just will take those steps. So like, I won't be signing up for a situation where I won't be able to take a break if I don't need to. It's probably why I loved working from home so much, because if I ever did need a break, I could literally just go upstairs and go lay down. Like, there's probably reasons why I've been thriving working from home and whatnot. But
Yeah.
knowing
Right.
that, and yeah, just being able to be proactive about it has been really helpful. And I feel like now that I know what it is, it's like so much easier to adjust and make a system. If I'm noticing something's causing consistent anxiety or like hyper, or if I'm like kind of rolling my, ruminating on something, like, why am I ruminating on that? Okay, let's go make an adjustment or sub that out or do whatever I need to do because I don't need to feel that way. So it's been pretty eye opening the last couple of years, and I feel like it's been great.
Right. I just wish there were ways that we could develop healthy boundaries without having to have our
Yeah,
full
true.
the breakdown.
Not great.
Right. That's why I'm like, let me be a cautionary tale to somebody else.
That's the reason I reached out to you, is just to hope that, like, I don't know if my story will, obviously not everybody's going to have no one's going to have my specifics, but if you find yourself in that state, just to be able to know, like, these are some things that I've learned the hard way. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of universal truth in terms of how your experience is so indicative of how we can get ourselves into that state, right? How we can get to that place of complete breakdown and having and how many different factors can play into all of the different reactions that we might have, and the physical side of it too, and that this could be related to neurodivergency and not just anxiety or some of the things that we do get told by our medical providers. Oh, you're just being hysterical, or or all of the ways in which we can be dismissed as women.
Yeah, and it's also been super great as I've been learning a lot about. I think just like you've mentioned in the past, you deep dived into all the things once you learned about it. I have too, and I've been, I really love podcasts, so been listening to so many, and I'll play if I find one that's appropriate for my son. I'll play one with him, and we've had a lot of amazing conversations, and I feel like that openness. I'm feeling. From what I can see, it just seems like he is going to be in such a better position to be able to communicate and get what he needs, because he will know, like, this is like, it's not going to be given to me this way. I need to ask for it, or I need to have that. He's not going to, I don't know. I think it's going to help him a lot, which has been great. So, yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I definitely see that. I feel that as a parent too, where we're developing this language. We're starting to see, like, what are these road signs, some of these warning signs, so that you don't get to the place where you're completely spinning out of control. And so how do we teach that to our kids to advocate for themselves and not to just keep pushing through and pushing through?
And even just understanding why it might be happening in your brain. Like, I've been listening to a lot of great ones about stress, and I forgot I could send you a link for one of the doctors that does one that some of the other ADHD people have interviewed. And that was super helpful to, like, understand how the brain worked and why the wiring was the way it was and what things doing what part. Just know, maybe I'm a little pretend scientist. I don't know. I find it fascinating, and it really helped me. It's like, oh, okay. So in order to do that, all I need to do is, like, bam, bam, bam. And that'll help bring me back to get that stress level back to equilibrium, or restore, and especially where you want it to be getting restored. Having that restoration period, I think, is probably the thing that had been missing for years. And it's not missing anymore. Really, I've made that a pretty huge priority.
Awesome. So what are some of the ways that you self-regulate?
Well, I lay down when I feel like there's definitely something that still happens physically to me from time to time. And I don't know, I've never been able to figure out, like, a trigger or something I can avoid. I don't really know what happens, but I'm noticing that when it does, I'm going to take a pause and take a break or take a deep breath. And it could just be just life. I don't really know why that happens, but it does. So that's just the deep breathing that's been helpful. And then, really knowing how not to, like, not ruminating. And I know it's like, how do you not ruminate? But I say, I'm going to put that on a list of things to do tomorrow, or I'm going to, have that be a tomorrow thing. And I've been pretty good at sticking with it. Yeah, of course I might wake up with some ideas or whatever. I did just start taking a medication that helps sleep, adds a little bit of help for sleep at night. If I am like, and I can usually tell like, oh, I've had a really stimulating or busy day. So that's been helpful. Being able to take that, it just helps calm the mind. And I don't even take it every day, and I take like the smallest dose you can. But that's been helpful. And then going outside, focusing on the things that I want. So like, why did I want to go back and work at camp? Like, I actually am very successful and do make enough money. I'm just a cheapskate and didn't want to pay it. So I'm recognizing that that's okay to just pay the money for the thing that you want. Like that, giving yourself permission to do that. Like that part of it's been weird. I have no idea why I'm such a saver, and I'm such a, like, I don't overspend, and I like won't buy the thing I want because it's $2 more expensive than the other thing. So I've just kind of been like, no, get the thing I want that's $2 more. Like, it's fine. So giving myself permission to give me the things that I want. And then taking steps, like there's a lot of things you might feel like the self-care side. So I've started taking a pottery class. I did an improv class, which was fantastically fun. Definitely recommend that. And doing some things that, for me, that were not relying, I found anything that it can be completely focused on that doesn't have me having to deal with coordinating anything for my child or my husband. And it's just something that I get to work on for me without, being interrupted. I mean, even if like the people are there, they might be chatting or whatever, but you're like, when you're at the place to do the pottery and throwing on the wheel, like you are focused on that. And that is what your goal is. Your goal is to make pottery for that hour, an hour and a half, whatever it is. Like I have found when I leave there, it's like, I feel so much better because I put all this, I can actually lean into something and do something that's enjoyable and fun for me. So those are some things. And then really just, making sure exercising. I started biking in the mornings. That's been great, because because of my heart stuff, I can't take stimulants. And so I've been going out of my way to come up with plans for what I can take. The bike riding each morning has been super helpful. Mm-hmm. And kind of, it's nice. It's like we wake up with nature and, drop my son off at school, hop on the bike and go, sometimes I only go 2 miles, but usually once I start on 2, then I'm like, oh, I'll keep going. And, it's like, I'll just ride around the neighborhood, and then I'm like 10 miles in. So that usually that happens far often. So sometimes just getting started and saying, I'm just going to do at least 2 miles, and then you'll see what happens once you're out there.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Yeah. My morning walk with my husband is a non-negotiable. That's
cool.
Yeah.
I'm doing it with you.
Well, we do it together because I think it's a time for us to check in about the day or the week, and it's also, been one of the great things about working from home too, is just been able to have that time together every morning. Mm-hmm. And it's like, unless it's pouring rain, we do it. And I don't think I would ever, if it was just me, I would find a reason not to, I'm sure. So, but yeah, it's absolutely, I think more than anything else, I think the morning exercise has been the most helpful. If I could pick one thing.
Yeah. And especially outside for some reason, there's something about like the birds chirping and even if I'm having to like bundle up and wear a huge jacket, like, I don't know, it's still worth it. Like, I'm not going to go in the rain. But I've noticed the days that I don't do it, or if it is raining or whatever, not, and I try to just work out inside, it's fine, but it just doesn't quite set me on such a positive footing forward. So, yeah.
I know, right? I've actually heard some interesting theories about the visual stimulation of being outside in nature and the peripheral light stimulation that we receive when we're in nature that's similar to EMDR therapy, that there's something about the like visual pulsing peripheral light stuff, which makes sense to me because I'm like, it's like a little brain massage. Anyway, that's another episode, right?
Podcasts as well. Yes. we like a lot of the same things. I should whatever you listen to there.
So I'm curious if you would rename ADHD to something else. Did you come up with a name?
Oh, sort of. I could. It's not super catchy, but basically highly observant creative thinkers.
Okay. I like that. For sure, right? I think because that's one of the things I always feel like is like, what would be a name that I would have actually been drawn to before my diagnosis? Because oftentimes when I think about like regulation and executive function, those aren't terms that I had any idea. I never would have thought, oh, that's me to a T. But the like overstimulation or any of the like chronic overwhelm, those ones I'm sort of like, oh yeah, that I definitely would have related to.
Yes, I was like trying to think of the positive, the positive side.
Right. Well, just yeah, but I mean,
the disorder part. But I get that why we have to have it be, we talk about the negative to get get services and whatnot. But.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that fascinating story and your experiences too. I found that really, really interesting. And so your furniture company is called Redhead Furniture, right? Redhead Furniture
Design. Yeah. And then another thing I've been doing for fun for myself is been doing more pet portraits, and I've been getting kind of into that lately, which has been fun. And I was just putting out to some friends, like, do you think I should start selling these? Because I used to just do them for like raising money for fundraisers and whatnot. But this is last week. I've put some stuff up, and everyone's like, I could have like 10 orders on things right now. So that's pretty fun. And that's I've been posting those Abby Lane _design on Instagram. So anyways, that's there.
Oh, I'll put a link to that for sure. Good to know.
By the time
we could never just have one business, right?
Hyper focus areas. We'll see how long I want to do it for, but as long as it's fun, I figure I'll do it for fun.
Right? Exactly.
Time. As soon as something might get too busy, I probably won't stick with it. But as long as it keeps remaining fun, I'll probably do it it's like a fun, relax. I find them meditative and relaxing to do. And so as long as they stay that way, we're good. And if I start feeling pressure, then.
That's such a great way of approaching it.
It's just fun.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Abby. This has been really great. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Katie.